And in terms of internships and kind of how I got my start in what became my career, during the summer after my third year, I interned in accounting at Paramount Pictures. And then during my fourth year, I worked as a marketing intern for the Alumni Association and worked in Professor Holt's experimental economics lab.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think I just saw Ella pop in.
Oh, awesome.
I don't know if she's like joined with audio or not.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah, sorry. My apartment like flooded earlier today, so the connection has been a little crazy, but sorry about that.
No, sorry that it flooded. We were just getting started. Ella, would you be able to kind of give us a skim of your college resume, kind of what clubs you were in, any part-time jobs or internships that you had?
Yeah. So when I got to UVA, I knew I wanted to work in sports. So I started as an equipment manager for the UVA football team. And I worked there my first year, like didn't do anything like econ or stat related. But after that, I kind of met the UVA football analyst like through that, and then ended up doing, I don't think they still do it anymore, but systems engineering students do like a capstone their fourth year. And 1 year they had like UVA football as their client pretty much. So we got to work with them. And like the professor who led that, his name is William Shearer. He's awesome. So he let me join as a second year. And I kind of just did that as an independent study, and did a little bit more like stat-based, like coding-based football analysis, which was fun. Stopped being an equipment manager. And then going into my third year, I interned in Arizona with the Diamondbacks, and I was an analyst there, a baseball ops analyst. And I kind of I got that kind of just through like cold emailing a lot of different MLB teams. And they were like one of the last teams I talked to. Like loved that. Didn't really know if I wanted to work in baseball or football. And like was gonna go back and work for Arizona going to my fourth year, but COVID hit. So all of the internships for like nearly all the MLB and NFL teams were canceled. So like my first thing that I did like since interning was I did the Big Data Bowl. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of it, but it's the NFL does basically like I think the last 4 years, the director of analytics at the NFL has led the NFL Big Data Bowl, and there's like a pretty open-ended question that will answer something about like special teams, like offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, and will give you a huge data set to work with. And you can kind of like submit in like a college competition or open competition. And last year they did a mentorship program like through it. So I did that. And my mentor, she used to work for the Eagles. She was really, really cool. So she kind of helped me with that. I submitted something and ended up winning. So after that, a lot of teams started reaching out to me after. And that's kind of where how I ended up here in Miami.
Oh, congratulations on winning the.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I know. If
cool.
if anyone has any interest in that, it's definitely a really cool project for sure.
Yeah. So just, I know we're both Laura and Ella, you guys both work in or you do work in data analytics. But how does this relate to your specific industry, the entertainment industry for Laura, and then the sporting industry for Ella? And what was your appeal to the industry?
Well, I guess I can start. So a big thing with just across the entertainment industry is that even though primarily it's about, creating, whether it's the film or the series, et cetera, and the art of that, at the end of the day, if you're going to get that second season, if you're going to, get new projects, you do have to make money. And being able to analyze what audiences want to see and figuring out how to position your piece so that the most people possible see that thing that will spark their interest and get them into the theater, or get them to subscribe to the streaming service, whatever it may be. That is something that has become increasingly data-driven over the years, because especially with the rise of social media and with all of the data available on streaming services in terms of what people are watching and what is keeping them on the services. Like, it really is about figuring out the story there to continue to drive business and continue to bring people the media that they want to see.
Yeah, I mean, mine's pretty similar, like just kind of just from the sports realm. Instead, like, I just don't think I ever really had an interest in, well, I mean, my stat classes were really interesting, but like, I just always liked the idea of like contributing to a team winning a game. And like, I played sports growing up. So like the competitive nature of it was always really fun. And rather than like being like so revenue driven, I think that it's cool to like have say in kind of like building a team, have say in like what goes on game to game. And like, I've wanted to work in sports my whole life, and it kind of just worked out where when I did it, I ended up loving it. So
How did you guys narrow down, like, because it sounds like both of you guys were really interested in your specific industries, like the entertainment and the sporting industries. How did you kind of narrow it down to wanting to work in, like, do data analytics work?
yeah, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely knew that I had always been kind of a numbers person, like took the advanced math classes through high school. And, even when I didn't know yet what my major was going to be at UVA, I always tended to enjoy the things where you were working with numbers and figuring things out from just like a calculations based perspective. And it really came down to just enjoying being a part of, the creative team, but being that numbers person and trying to figure out what roles made sense with that. And when I did my thesis, I really enjoyed the fact that analytics is in many ways a creative way to work with numbers. It's not the same as my accounting internship was, where there is a set way of doing things and you're just kind of, more plugging things into boxes and like trying to stick to the status quo, versus analytics is very much you're looking at patterns. You're trying to look at things in a way that no one's looked at it before to find those insights that no one has seen that can really, drive your business. So I really enjoyed being able to kind of marry my love of the creative with my love of just all things numbers based and data.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty similar, and I think something that, at least like if any of you like women there are interested in working in sports, it kind of at least gave me a little bit more of a leg up, because I like had never played football and I never played baseball. So it was a little bit more difficult for me to like enter the sports industry through the like realm of scouting. Because I like no matter what, I could probably study scouting for like hours and hours, and regardless, like not like there are women who do scout and there are people who haven't played who do scout, but like I think that I have a lot more to add and value like from an analytics standpoint. So that was kind of like why I decided to do that. And I also just like really liked math, and think that the sports industry in general is like really heading towards being very heavily analytics. I mean, baseball's already there. Scouting isn't super important anymore. But at least for like football, I definitely think in like 10 years, it'll hopefully be where baseball is. So it's fun to kind of be on like that starting, I guess, end of that, rather than something that's dying down a little bit.
Very cool. So at what point of your college tenure did you guys start the job application process? This could be like for either for internships or for like your first job out of college. And then how did you find like your job postings, and how did like the ECO or other career offices help you guys find these jobs?
Well, I would say I tried to look for an internship my sophomore year, but I didn't really find any opportunities. Most places were looking more for like third year level students. So I ended up just doing a study abroad program going into my third year. And then in my third year, I really definitely worked and focused. I had a giant spreadsheet. Jen saw a lot of me throughout this process. She was exceedingly helpful in just, finding the different internship programs, finding, the different alumni that might be good to talk to, whether it was just advice or people that might have an opportunity in their company, and working throughout that process. So it probably started like figuring out which companies and which industries I wanted to focus on in the first half of my third year, and then really focused on, because I was mostly doing entertainment roles at that time, that has more of like a spring cycle. So second semester, I really just, hit the ground running with like all the applications, and then eventually the interviews, and, connecting with those alumni that might have opportunities throughout the entirety of my third year spring. And then I obviously had my internship, and then did a very similar format my fourth year when it came to looking for my full-time job post-graduation.
Yeah, the sports industry is really interesting, like, especially depending on the sport you want to work in. So if you can't really apply anywhere in season, like there are probably no football job postings right now. If you want to work in baseball, all of the job postings probably just hit or are hitting this week. So my second year, once the baseball season ended, I like reached out to nearly every team and like cold emailed them, which I don't know if I would necessarily recommend, but it did work. And through that, I kind of just ended up talking and like to like a ton of people who worked in the industry, and a ton of people who like were analysts, a couple like assistant GMs, a couple of scouts, and they gave me a lot of like really good feedback on like what I should be doing, how to kind of like get my name out there in sports, and especially in sports analytics. And then like they were helpful in finding other job postings, like then they would kind of send things along. But for baseball, typically like Fangraphs is a good website for job postings. Teamwork Online too is a good one. But you can't really find these things on like Handshake. They're a little bit more hidden. I know like the Phillies have posted something in the past on Handshake, and I think the Braves have, but it's not as much of like a very public thing. Half of the jobs are also like not even on these websites. Like a lot of them will kind of just make an internship for you. So for example, like the Diamondbacks didn't have an internship available technically. They never applied. But they like would sometimes have an intern if they found somebody. So they weren't like actively seeking anybody, but sometimes if you literally just like ask a team if you can help out in any way, they'll respond and say like, here, do you want to do like a video internship? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And you won't have to do a specific application. For football, it's a little bit different. There's like nearly nothing out there that's public. I got my job right now because I like submitted that big data bowl, and then they like found my email and reached out to me, and we just like have been talking for the past from like June and July on, and I never applied for that either. So sports is a lot more networking, and like putting public research out there rather than like doing a certain application. And like to be completely fair, like, or to be completely honest, my fourth year, I mean, I just graduated in May. So like, I didn't really do much job search in fall. Like none of the sports jobs were open because of COVID. There were like a couple things that were opening up, but nothing that I was super interested in. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do other than working in sports. So I kind of just waited until spring, and it worked out because like this big dateable thing, like in all like my connections that I've had, once COVID started dying down a little bit, like a ton of people were reaching out. So
Cool. So I guess just to follow up on that, I know Ella, you mentioned a lot of like the cold emailing, but networking is always a huge question that comes up in just like all of our How I Got This Job panels. So I'm curious for both of you, like how did network like play a role in your job hunt? And like I think for our students it'd be really helpful to get kind of tactical with like how specifically you cold called, like, or how you networked, like whether that's cold calling or cold emailing, right. Kind of talking about that process.
Mm-hmm. For me, I would say networking was definitely very important because when it came to my Paramount Pictures internship, there are thousands of people that are applying to these programs at the big studios. And it's really just because of the quantity, just getting your resume looked at to even, get an interview is the hardest part. So I had reached out to, I found a UVA alumni that was working in the finance department and specifically reached out to him and, talked about a little about my drama experience, as well as, being in the econ department and having an interest in this very specific area that he was working in. And we ended up, messaging back and forth throughout most of my spring semester. And he was able to put in a recommendation for me to get my resume looked at. And once my resume got looked at, I was able to get the interview. And once I got to the interview, I was able to secure the internships. So it definitely was really important to have that connection just because of the volume of applications. And I found him through the UVA alumni group on LinkedIn and just reached out. And I think the important thing for me, because it's definitely like hard to make those cold call connections, was just more quality over quantity. Like I found just a handful of people who were really genuinely working in the exact sorts of roles that I was specifically looking at. Like when I reached out to this guy at Paramount, he had been a drama major, and like we talked back and forth about the different productions that had been going up at the school, and had a really like personal connection there, where if I had just cold called a million people, I might not have been able to build on that. And then that connection doesn't really help if you don't continue the conversation and get that recommendation, get that movement on your application, whatever it might be. So I would say that was definitely really important. And in addition to him, Jen also did a great job of just connecting me with different alumni that she knew, and then having that introduction was also really helpful because it gave you that preliminary level of familiarity with people that she already thought would be good to connect.
Yeah, I think the same thing with sports. Like you can be probably the smartest and best analyst ever, and if you don't have any like connections, you're not going to find a job in sports, which is probably similar for like most industries. But I think like I personally didn't know anybody until I started cold emailing. And like I think the best thing to do, like, okay, let's say you want to do more like salary based stuff, you don't want to do as much like data analytics, like you have to find the people that are like doing the job that you want to do. I know even sometimes some people reach out to me and they're like more like video people, and especially in season, like we don't have much time to reach out to people and help people out. So like you want to make sure that you're kind of hitting like you're hitting the right people, especially based off of your interest. So like the best thing, like what I did for baseball is I would go on their front office website, look up like maybe a senior level analyst, the director of research and development, and sometimes they're called just the director of analytics, and then like the assistant GM. And I would email all three of them, and just basically like send my resume over, kind of tell them what I was interested in and what I could do for them, cover letter, like all of that stuff. It ended up working really well. I don't know why, but like I couldn't tell you why. I could have just gotten lucky, but like out of the 30 or 29 teams, I think I want to say like 21 or 22 like got back to me, and like we talked on the phone. So I would definitely recommend that. And kind of like once you meet some certain people, like your world is just kind of opened up completely, and you almost don't even have to try that. Like you don't have to be cold emailing and like spending 5 hours a day figuring out how to do this anymore. In sports too, they have a lot of like, okay, so I'm sure you guys have heard of like the MIT like Sloan conference. That one's like decent. It's like whatever. I would definitely recommend going to like smaller conferences. Sabre Analytics conference is a baseball conference. pretty small. It's only for stat people. Typically, like a ton of director of analytics people will go there. A lot of analysts from baseball teams will go there. I know, like, if I were to stay in Arizona, like they would have sent us all there in March. And like if you look around, like I think there's one at Carnegie Mellon that they do every year too. So like just looking around at like these little conferences, or you'll probably have a better shot of meeting people and making a good connection. And then another note, for some reason, UVA has a lot of people who work in the sports analytics industry, like a ton. So like just kind of looking through like UVA alum, I know there's a good amount in baseball that I know of, and there's a good amount in football too.
Awesome. Laura, I know you mentioned the resume, and then Ella, you mentioned like cover letters. Can you split those two up and kind of talk about like key points that like what do you think is important in a resume, and like then Ella for cover letter?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for my resume, I would say I will admit I went to the career office probably over 10 times, just like having different people look over my resume and making sure it was as, clean and effective as possible. And the big thing that I heard over and over again was, one, to always make each bullet point, an action item. So, not something like passive, like more like, I led this project, like I, did this analysis, and like making it just like very, verb based up about all of that, as well as wherever you can quantifying the impact that you had, like especially when I worked at the Alumni Association on the marketing team, I was in charge of a lot of the social media. So, being able to quantify, like, I grew the Instagram 200%, and like really putting a number to that and showing in a quantifiable way, especially, for analytics roles where the numbers are going to be playing an important role, being able to show the exact impact that you have had in your prior roles is a really great thing to call out for sure.
Yeah. And then in terms of the cover letter, I mean, I think the most important thing for sports is like they're getting billions of resumes, like billions of cover letters. Like I'm sure that there's a ton of people sending them every single day, especially if you're applying to something that's public. So just like really trying to make it a little bit more individual, like why you are, like why you specifically are attracted to the sports industry, like what brought you there. Examples of like things that you've done to kind of like further expand your passion for sports. So if you've done a certain project, if you've like, and I mean, I know that Laura talked about the resume, but absolutely, like if you've done any type of public research, even if you think it's awful, like put it in your resume and put it in your cover letter, because like you probably like they like to see the way that you think. It won't really matter if it's that bad. So I think like my cover letter just really like honed in on like here's everything that I've kind of done at UVA to like set myself up for a career in sports, and like here's why I am so passionate about it, and why like sports analytics is something that I think that like I will want to do for the rest of my life, kind of thing. So just try your best to make it individual and like show your passion, because they want to know why you're choosing sports. You're not going to consulting or not going somewhere else.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I know Josh Taylor has a question, so feel free to unmute and ask.
Yeah, I kind of had a question more geared towards Ella in the sports industry.
Yeah.
How often do you use PFF, like Pro Football Focus analytical tools? And would you think it'd be helpful to be familiar with them beforehand?
Yeah. So I actually first worked with PFF when I worked with the college football with UVA in second year. I use it every day in my job. Like that's like all we use right now. So definitely being comfortable with that, because I think like that was something that helped me get my job, at least right now, is we talked a lot about PFF just in interviews and it wasn't as much like grilling me, but like, it's just like a topic of conversation. The coaches in the NFL are just starting to learn PFF. So coming in with like the knowledge and being able to explain a lot of these like PFF metrics to them can be super helpful. But yeah, like nearly all of the analysis I do is pulled from PFF right now. So very important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Taking a little turn, can you guys describe like how like a current day-to-day, like what you do on a day-to-day basis in your roles? And like what does your like work week look like? Is it mostly meetings or kind of mostly independent work? Do you work a traditional 9 to 5, or is it more like you can kind of schedule your own hours?
Well, my job has definitely been some slightly strange hours recently because HBOMax just recently launched in Europe. So I tend to start my day and on the earlier side and just connect with those teams out in the headquarters for our European team is in London. So I'll reach out to them, and we do a lot. We're still getting them up to speed with a lot of just how our data streams work and like all of how that flow happens. So kind of advising their team and making sure they don't have any questions and everything is working for them as expected. And then once I've worked with their team, then I'll start to work with our East Coast based teams, kind of working through the time zones. And connecting with them. That's where a lot of our data engineering team is based. And my role right now is a little more heavily technical than my original role, which was more just based in analytics. Now I also work with like the actual building of the data streams and things from the platform into our reporting systems and our marketing systems. So I work fairly heavily now with our data engineering team. So I'll connect with them, see if there are any new builds that they've completed, and do testing on any ones that have been completed recently. And then that will usually take me through the first part of my day. And then in the afternoon, that will be solely, me speaking with all of our West Coast based teams and, connecting with my team, because we'll be all working on different projects, different data streams, and just aligning there because, especially now that we are an international business, there is just a lot that we have to all stay aligned with. And then also taking some time to train. We have a new data analyst. So, I'll usually try and spend an hour or two with him and just, make sure he doesn't have any questions, see if there's anything, new that he wants to learn that I can help him with and things like that. So it's a lot more meetings than you might expect just because of how big the business is and how many people we have to have aligned on just what our data set is and how we can most effectively utilize it. So I would say it's about 50% meetings and 50%, doing my own like calculations based on all of our data streams.
Yeah, I think, well, okay, so I also worked for the Twins like right after graduation, and baseball and football are my day-to-day are like pretty much two different industries. So I can touch on both of them if that's helpful. But basically like right now, I mean, we're in season. Also, the reason I'm looking like on a different screen is because I'm working right now also, because very like last minute stuff. A lot of like, it's only me and another analyst. So we kind of just have to be ready to just go whenever. Typically what we do, like a typical work week in season is we'll do like advanced reports on Monday. So we get ready for the game on Sunday. And we'll like give coaches basically just like information of what we think will help us like defensively win the game and offensively win the game, depending on our opponent for the week. So we're playing Thursday, so the meetings got moved to today, like last minute. But so like that's typically Monday, and then we'll do like coaches meetings once these are done. And that's like typically lasts like an hour. We'll do like the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. And then Tuesday is also a little bit more like doing like a little bit more like scouting stuff for coaches depending on what they ask for. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is more like independent projects and doing things that are a little bit like more for like off season, more for like free agency, the draft, just kind of things that we're specifically interested, looking at like stability of new metrics that we want to create. And it's like a very much like I kind of do something different every day, other than that like strict Monday meeting. Baseball is a lot more independent, I think. Like we had at the Twins like 40 analysts, which is an insane amount even for baseball. And and we all were doing like our own very, very like nitty gritty project. So it like, again, off seasons are pretty different. You have normal hours. Right now I'm probably working about 70 a week. But that being said, like when you're in football, you're more of like the actual football staff. You're not like your own entity. So I like work with the coaches and the players every day. And like they're working long hours, so you're just kind of there when they're there, and there's a lot to do anyway. Like I'm pretty busy right now, so it's not that bad. I wouldn't let the hours scare you. And then off seasons like are probably around like 50. I haven't had a football off season yet, but definitely like more tame. And I know that we get like a lot of like weeks off just to prep for what the training camp and the next season will bring. So
Gotcha. Laura, what is like a current project you're working on now, or like a past project that you've really enjoyed working on, and how is that representative of your job? And also if you want to touch on kind of the technical tools that you use in your job as well, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Probably more relevant to data analytics, because the stuff I'm doing right now isn't necessarily, it's more on like the data stream building versus the analytics side. But in my previous 2 roles, I was at Merkle and then at Warner Brothers. So Merkle, I was working on the Warner Brothers account, and then I moved internal. We did a lot of really cool projects just around the different promotions that we have for films when they are going in market. So we'll have all of these different clips of the trailers that are going out, and we're trying to figure out exactly what about the movie is really going to speak to people. So we would work with these retention graphs. If you've ever worked in social media analytics, that Facebook and Instagram and all of them will give you on different posts for businesses, where you'll be able to see exactly where people are dropping off or really staying with the video. So we would analyze a ton of these different retention graphs to figure out exactly what about a film people were really responding to, so that throughout the rest of the marketing campaign, we could really speak to those aspects. So sometimes, maybe a specific age group really liked one character, or maybe, one gender or one ethnicity was really responding to when it was represented as an action film versus more of a comedy. So like really being able to like play with all of the different, views of a movie and see when people were clicking to buy tickets, when people, were staying with the video, and, figuring out exactly how to position the movie going forward was really cool.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. So students, if you guys want to ask any questions that you have, feel free to either drop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask.
Oh, and you did second half of your question.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot
about the technical. Forgot about that. So I would say the biggest 2 tools in general are SQL coding, for just anytime you're working with data in the background, like in all of my like Snowflake stuff, especially like the way that we store our data, especially now that I work mostly with just internal data versus Merkle was more, we were receiving the data already packaged for us. Whenever we're like playing with that and figuring out how to visualize that, that is a lot of SQL coding if you're able to get experience with that. And then visualization tools are also fantastic when you're, going into any sort of analytics role, because it's one thing if you know what's going on, it's far more important to be able to explain to someone and present to them what's going on. So things like Tableau and Looker, and having experience with that and just how to present your findings is really, really great to have.
And then did you learn most of those on the job, and I guess Ella, for you too, like
yeah,
skills you learned on the job or beforehand?
Yeah, I definitely learned it on the job, as well as a little bit in my internships, which, gave me that preliminary, like basic level understanding. And then once I had my full-time job, like really diving into it.
Yeah, I think I worked same like SQL, Tableau. I used a little bit, but like I use R mainly. A lot of machine learning, like a ton of machine learning. But the best thing that you can do, like is learning how to take something as complicated or complex as machine learning and like figuring out how to get into like terms that coaches can understand, or like somebody who doesn't have a stat background can understand. And I feel like that stuff I mainly learned on the job. Like most of my technical background, I mean, it comes from repetition and like doing it at work, and like obviously you use like Stack Overflow, like all of that stuff. It's pretty easy to like teach yourself things that you don't know already. But yeah, like most of what I do is from my stat background, but learning how to communicate it is mainly learned on the job. And I also didn't know SQL at all. I learned that on the job completely. And I don't think it's that hard to learn.
Awesome. So I'm going to just open up the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I can continue as well. Okay. So I know that since your first jobs, you both have moved on to different roles. Kind of what led the process of, or like what led you to want to do this, or yeah, like kind of how did this happen?
Well, the entertainment industry is an ever-changing place. If you follow any of it online in terms of the news, like there's always different acquisitions and different studios are doing well and hiring, laying off at any given time. So actually only 4 months into my position at Merkle, the AT&T merger happened. And at that, when the AT&T merger was finalized, they decided to cut all of the marketing contracts that Warner Brothers had already established. So our entire office of 50 plus people were laid off 4 months into joining the workforce. But thankfully, because I had already established a pretty good relationship with the people at Warner Brothers that we were constantly working with, I was able to find an intern position with Warner Brothers. So that's also just a big thing, is you can't necessarily rely on a job to be there the next day. So always putting your best foot forward with whoever you're interacting with and always making those connections where you can. I learned to be very important very fast. And then I worked internally at Warner Brothers for about a year, and then they started hiring for HBOMax. And it was again a similar situation where people that I knew from my team or just my building that I had talked to and was friendly with started going over to HBOMax, and I really respected a lot of the people that had made that move. Those were the sort of people that I wanted to surround myself with. And the building that I was in, like there was a lot of people who were kind of, stagnant in their career. They were just they were happy with where they were at, but they weren't necessarily looking to make moves. And that wasn't the energy that I necessarily wanted to be around. Like I had learned a lot at my job, but I wanted to continue to grow and continue to challenge myself. And the people that HBOMax was attracting were just absolutely the people that I, wanted to surround myself with. And I found this role that was, much more heavily technical than what I had already been doing. And I knew would be a good challenge, but also still build off of my marketing and analytics background. So when I saw that job, I immediately applied and just had a great process with it and was able to get the job. So I would say just kind of always being open to opportunities when they present themselves and just always putting your best foot forward, because you never know what connection will end up being the one that is important down the line.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think like I mainly switched because I wanted to work in football. Like that was like my dream sport that I wanted to work in since I like started doing all this stuff. I can speak a little bit on like why I was more drawn to football. Like football was one, I just like the sport a lot better. But it's actually like at a really, really cool spot right now for analytics. So like I enjoyed my job in baseball for sure. It was a little bit more 9 to 5-y, which is fine. Like it's nice because my hours were good, but there's like 3 to 4 people that kind of serve as the pipeline in between you and the coaches and you and the players. So you're definitely like you have a lot of impact, and stats in general are like the coaches know what the coaches are like pretty up to date and up to speed with all of that stuff. So you're not really trying to get people to buy into the analytics world whatsoever, which can be nice. But on the flip side, like you're not really marginally like impacting the baseball world of analytics as much as you would be in football. And it's cool because I went from a team of 40 people to a team of just me and my boss at the Dolphins. So like I talk to the coaches every day. I talk to the players every day. Now there's not as much buy-in, and like I don't know if any of you guys follow the Dolphins, but we're not doing too hot right now. And like obviously it's not all attributed to that, but like even just going for it on fourth down is something that we're not fully the coaches aren't fully on board with yet. So like that can be frustrating, but it's cool because I think like being on that side of it, you have a lot more impact. So like 5 years down the line, if I'm still here and the Dolphins become an analytically driven team, like I could have been one of the first people who kind of helped that initiative, which is I think a lot of fun. And football in general is just like really cool analytically, very different than baseball. So a lot more like combinatorial probability stuff, and like you can't really like isolate players. So the problem solving there is a lot more fun, I think.
Well, I know you said you work on a small team now. Laura, how big are the teams that you work on a day-to-day basis?
So we have like the team level is generally like pretty small. I'll usually be in meetings with my direct team that I work with day to day is about 5 people. And then, the other teams that we work with, like I'll be in meetings with usually around like a 15 to 20 person range at most. And that'll be, around like 3 different groups that'll all be, coordinating on the call. So I would say they try and keep it like pretty small and nuclear for like different, like specific job functions. But then we have great relationships with all of the other teams that we're associated with.
Cool. And then I think a final topic that we could touch on that would be beneficial would be kind of the interviewing. So how would you describe the interview process of how you got your job? And then kind of any insight like on like kind of what questions you were asked, how many stages in the interview process were there? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, so I would say for Paramount, it was a preliminary. So both in internships and in the jobs I've interviewed since, it generally starts with a behavioral round of just, they've looked at your resume, they're interested, and now they want to just, get a sense if like you're the sort of person who could succeed in this role, just from like a personality standpoint and just like a general like conversational standpoint. Because again, a big thing in analytics that some people might not expect is how important the communication and presentation aspect of it is. So they really will be, without even asking you any sort of like technical questions, just be looking for someone who can, really present themselves and present like the things that are important to them that they want to convey in a way that's very clear and concise, so that they'll be able to, do the same on the job when it comes to the different findings that they have come across. So I would say that's generally the first round is what quote unquote the behavioral, and then we'll move into the technical phase of asking more about the specific skills that you have, maybe asking you to, do a simple, like in the job level, I've been asked to do, like simple SQL queries in the final round, but typically in the internship process, they're not going to expect you to, have any hard skills right out of the gate, because internships are very much about learning. So it's more just making sure in that second round that this is really a genuinely good fit and something that is going to, set you on the right path for your career. So I would say when it comes to internships, like that's the most important, is like being prepared to just like convey exactly similar to what Ella was saying earlier of like, you've done all the things that you could to put yourself in the right position for this career. And like, this is what you want to do, and showing how everything you've done at UVA is, leading you on that path and helping you there. And then once you get to the job level, also being able to speak to, I got a lot of times they would just simply ask you like, tell me about, explain a concept to me fully so that I understand it in detail. So having, just like having one topic that you really are an expert on and can like really go into detail and have someone explain is always a really good thing to have in your pocket. And it really can be anything, like whatever you're passionate about that is complex enough that, it would be impressive in an interview to be able to have someone understand that concept as well. So that's always a good one to have. And then beyond that, I've also been asked to do a presentation on an analytics project of my choice. So thankfully, having done a thesis in analytics, that worked out pretty well because I was able to essentially present my thesis. But regardless of whether you have that in your background or not, just being able to show your thought process is really what's going to make you stand out.
Yeah, sports is like pretty much the same thing. There's kind of like two different types of interviews, like interview processes that you can go down. One is like you have your first behavioral interview, you made it past the resume round. Talk about your resume, but it's really like, I think it's the same for sports and entertainment. Like, I think when a lot of my friends were going through like other data science interviews and like other even just like consulting interviews, more like the coding background probably, people's skills weren't as important for their interviews, and they're like incredibly important for sports and entertainment. Like you could, again, like you can be the smartest person ever, but if you can't like convey the information, like it's pretty much useless at that point. So like they definitely like, that's like first round is you can just trying to see if you're a good fit, trying to see if you'll get along, trying to see if you're like a normal person and kind of can be like a good personality in a sports building. Second round, typically they'll send you like a project. They'll give you like 2 weeks to do it. Sometimes it'll be like 3 questions. Sometimes it'll just be like, do a pitch model or like tell me, like write a completion probability model for football. Like those are typically what they are. So just like classification or like any type of regression models. You'll have to like send them back a paper in your code. So we kind of just check for like your coding style, if you are at least like an efficient and clean coder. And then if you can, again, like convey the information in a nice way in the paper, usually it's just like a 1-pager. And then the next interview, you will like talk about, if you make it past that round, you'll talk about the project that you did. And then they'll probably just like ask a little bit more like technical based questions. So like one I have gotten consistently is like, what, if you come here, like, what would you want to work on? So like always have a question for that or answer for that. Like you should have a reason of like why you're specifically interested in the sport. Like, is it roster construction? Is it like injury prevention? Is it just looking at like certain game management things in football? Is it looking at pitch development? Like there's, I mean, it's endless, like, and it doesn't really matter what it is. We just want to make sure that you're like interested in a certain thing and have ideas to bring to the table. And I have done presentations too of like an analytics project that I've done in the past. On the flip side, there's like the other interviews that I've done, which is what I did for the Dolphins, where like you kind of like have your resume out there and they like, you have your public research out there where they're literally just like talking to you and it's super casual and like, it doesn't feel like an interview. And I've had those probably more often than not. Like my current one, my boss and I, like every time he called me, we kind of just talked. Like I'd never felt like I was being interviewed, and I don't even know if I was technically being interviewed. Like it was kind of weird. I think a good sign too, like when sports teams do this, is like I talked to the general manager for the Dolphins before I got the job, and like same thing. Like he definitely interviewed me, like for sure, but it was still like casual. It was very informal. Like we were just kind of chatting, talked like about UVA football for like 20 minutes. And I mean, it wasn't anything like he wasn't grilling me. We were like genuinely just talking. So those interviews I've always liked more, obviously. but yeah, you kind of have like, there's like two sides to it. So I don't know how you can figure out which one you'll get, but yeah, be prepared for both.
And then is there like a hard recruiting timeline for, is it more like the data science specific or kind of more industry specific in terms of like when your jobs would recruit? If that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. For internships in entertainment, at least in LA, like the big studios will do just a very standard summer program where the applications will typically go up in the spring semester and then they will fill them, about a month out from graduation, sometimes trickling in later than that. I had done my final interviews before like graduation week and all of that, but didn't actually get my acceptance until beach week, which was kind of fun because then I was celebrating at the beach with all my friends. But it's typically like follows a pretty distinct time frame for the interviews. And then when it comes to like the job hiring process, it really is just whenever a role needs to be filled. So it's not very seasonal the way that, obviously sports is. It's really just, when a studio decides to expand or decides to put up a streaming service or things like that, there are going to be all of a sudden a lot of roles available. So you just kind of have to keep your eyes open to what is popping up around the time that you're looking, because there isn't, unfortunately, any distinct like timeline of when those roles go up. It's really more just industry based.
Yeah.
Follow-up question.
Football. Oh,
Just real quick. I'm wondering how appropriate it would be for somebody to reach out to you for help before an interview with your organization. I know that you might already be involved with them because it's so small, let's say, especially for you, Ella, and you might know that they're going to be interviewed, but is that appropriate or not appropriate?
Are you saying like if somebody was going to be interviewed by the Dolphins and they reached out and asked for help with the interview?
Yeah, to help prep.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like this is a little bit more of like a personal question. Like I personally would think that that's totally fine.
Mhm.
And there's like been countless, like I wouldn't have gotten my job if I didn't have people help me. So like a lot of like pay it forward. Like, I mean, I've helped people. Actually, a girl just interviewed with the twins for the job that I had back in June, and I helped her with her interview. I think it's fine. I mean, I probably couldn't disclose certain information, obviously, about the interview itself, but like I would feel completely comfortable helping somebody out.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a strike against them to ask you.
No, I don't think so at all.
And I'm sorry, Ellen, I cut you
Oh,
off. We're going to answer.
Yeah, no, we're talking about like the season. Yeah. So for football, typically like the internships again don't really pop up, but don't like cold email anybody during the season because they just probably won't respond. But the full-time jobs will typically start opening up around like April or May to be hired in like June or July. Because analytics again is just like a new world in football. Like right now, a couple teams are hiring. I know the Eagles are hiring. The Cardinals, I believe, are hiring for a full-time job. And like they're like conducting the interview process right now. So sometimes it can be in season, but typically it's like more in the summer. And then for baseball, like again, if you go on Fangraphs right now, like you'll see the last week, like dozens of jobs were posted. That'll pretty much be like a huge jump right now. And then some teams will also like be interviewing in like February or March. Like we'll try to get those full-time positions filled before opening day. And they generally would like to do that before spring training begins. So like around February. But for internships, like since the internship would be in the summer and it's like in the middle of the baseball season, like you'll see internships pop up in the fall and you'll see them pop up in the spring, but you'll never see anything really for baseball pop up during the season. So as long as you're just like looking at when the season ends, what teams make the playoffs, like what teams don't, you kind of know when to reach out to the teams and when they should be posting any internships or full-time jobs.
Awesome. Well, we are just at time, so we'll begin to wrap up. Ella and Laura, thank you so much for your time and for all of the wonderful advice you had to share with our students this morning.